Hi, this is an introductory video about ASP.NET MVC in which I will create a very basic ASP.NET MVC application, and in this basic application you will learn mainly about the architecture of this application, like ASP.NET MVC application, that how data flows from controller to view and back from view to controller, and maybe we will not involve model in this. So MVC is actually model view controller. It is a design pattern. Sometimes it is called an architecture, sometimes it is called a programming technique which can be implemented in any programming language, and but ASP.NET MVC, the structure of the application is by default is MVC. So you have to do the development by following the rules of MVC, in which you have to separate your model, you have a controller and then view. So before we talk about ASP.NET MVC, basically MVC in detail, let's start creating a very simple ASP.NET MVC application. So I will be using Visual Studio 2017. 2019 is out in the market. You can also download and install that, and if you see any difference, you can just put a comment in the comments area on this video, and we will discuss more about it. So let's create a new project. You can create a new project from here. You can go and file a new project, and we will be looking at Visual C#, because I will be using Visual C#, and I will go into the web section, and then in this web section I will create ASP.NET web application. I will not be creating ASP.NET core web applications. We will discuss this later on, but I will choose ASP.NET web application. If you don't see this web section and you don't see this ASP.NET web application, it means that ASP.NET web application SDK and its components are not installed. If you don't see this here, you can open Visual Studio installer, and in installer you can add or remove different components which will be used in Visual Studio. So it's getting ready and fetching all the information of installed and available components. So let's I guess we will, yeah. So you see that I have installed .NET desktop application components, and I have installed ASP.NET and web development. So if I see that I have, when I installed this, I installed .NET Framework 4.6 and development tools and .NET Core and ASP.NET and web development tools. So these are important and essential to install and to do the development in ASP.NET. So if you have not installed, you just check this and you will see that the total space that will be required, like that will be in GBs, and it will do the installation from the internet. Anyways, so let's create our first ASP.NET app. So web app for let's say, for example, for YouTube demo. So I will create this application. .NET Framework version is 4.6 is fine. 4.7.2 is the latest right now at the time of recording of this video. So when I choose web application, it asks me or gives me many options, that if I want to go to old school, I can choose web forms, but this demonstration is about MVC, so I will choose MVC. In authentication, I can choose authentication about individual user account. It will add a component of registering, a login, and I guess forgot password as well, and you will be able to create an account within our application, but I will not add this. We will be developing our own application for this. So I will choose MVC, and MVC, as you can say that MVC the application is allow you to build application using the model view controller architecture. So it says architecture over here. So let's press OK. So it will create a basic building block about the application, and it's creating a kind of basic template, and above that template we can do our ASP.NET MVC development. You can see it's adding different jQuery and other components. So this is the architecture of the application. We have a solution. One solution can have multiple projects. So this is one project that we have created, web app for YouTube demo, and this is a publishing page where we will be publishing our application using different mechanisms such as publishing on Azure, FTP, IIS, and so on. So we don't need right now. So let's look at the application over here. We don't have any connected services. We have properties of this application. In this property we have assembly information where we talk about the application name and details and so on. We have references added over here which are actually by default added. We can add and remove those references later on. These are actually the DLLs which will be, or the libraries which will be used in the application. So app data actually contains, normally it contains a database file. If we are developing a database based application for storing some data in local database file. So app.start actually is a starting point of our application, and bundle.configuration file actually has a configuration of different bundles such as jQuery, bootstraps, CSS. So it has if you see that we have you have scripts, and in scripts and in content we have different. You see the content folder over here. So this content folder actually contain all the bootstrap and different CSS that will be used in this theme. If you are customizing your theme, you can do this. And these are actually the controllers that we will talk about, that how we do things. So these are the actually the filter configuration. We don't need to modify this right now. And this route configuration file is important, which actually explain that how the request from a URL will be routed. If you see that, and you can actually create more routes. This is the route which is a default route, and the URL pattern would be controller, action, and ID. And the default is, for example, if somebody writes something like www.abc.com, so the default route would be home controller, and the action is index, and ID is actually optional parameter. If somebody specify that, it will take it, otherwise it will just not ask user to enter that route. So this is the route configuration. We will get back to this route configuration later on when we will run our very basic application. So content I already discussed, contains CSS. So controller, and we have some fonts already. Models directory right now is empty. We have not created any model. And the scripts actually creates by default jQuery script provided by this this template. And then views actually contain all the CS/HTML files. CS/HTML files are actually C# HTML files. They can be VB HTML files as well, depending upon the language that we have chosen to develop our application. And you can see that we have a shared folder and we have a home directory. So home directory contains about.cshtml, contact.cshtml. We will see more about this. Is webicon.icon. It's a global ASX, and this is actually packages.configuration file, which will install. Web.configuration file actually contains different configurations about this application, such as connection string, etc. So let's run this application. You can choose different browsers. you can choose to have different options while running this application. So by default it's giving Google Chrome, and IIS is actually the server which actually runs ASP.NET application or host, just like if you are developing in PHP. So the Apache is actually the server which execute your application, and after that it handle all the requests and gives you response. So this is our very basic and first application. If we run, we will see home page, and in that home page we will see multiple options. So first time when we execute the application, because it's compiling and generating output, and that's why it will take a bit more time, but later on it will be a bit faster. So this is our very basic application which is generated from a template. So if I click on home, so this is actually home, and if I go back and show you, so the default routing is actually home, controller is home, and the index is action over here. And then after that, if I come here in about, so we have home and we have about. So this is actually the URL which actually tells over here. So we have a controller and we have an action, right? So this routing actually explains that whenever we write something, we write a controller, and then inside a controller we specify a controller action method, right? And then if I go and click on contact, so this is a home which is a controller, and this is an action, right? And it's displaying some information over here. So if I click on home, it is default route is home/index. So you see that if I click on home or enter home/index, it's the same as this, because in the configuration it is specified that if user does not enter anything, it will by default go to the home controller and triggers the index action. So if I'm at about, and if I write index, I will go back to this index. So this is this one, right? So this is our very basic application which has different we have one home controller, and it has different actions. So let's go back and see more about this home controller. So this home controller is actually it is a derived class of controller, and the namespace is our application name .controllers, and its name is home controller. So the controller is appended with the name of a controller always, and these are the actually actions which we see over here. So index, about, and contact. So whenever we, let's say for example, let me show you. So if I add a breakpoint over here, right, and I run my application, and if I go and click on about, so about will actually, if you see at the status bar, is /home/about, which means it will look for a home controller and it will look for an about action. So if I click on this, you can see that this breakpoint is triggered, and the control of the execution of application is right now over here on this about method. So the controller actually decides what to do when this action is called, and it is actually returning a view. So let's continue. I'm pressing F5. So it's just displaying this page. So similarly, when I go to the contact, if I come back to the about, and then it's again triggered. So that's actually how the flow of the application works. So right now in MVC we have discussed that view and the controller. So view actually, when I click on something, it looks for a controller and it looks for a particular action of that specific controller, and that controller, depending upon what is the algorithm and the business logic written inside a controller, according to that things are returned to the view, or different type of view is returned. So in this case, in our application, just returning a view which is an action result, which is a system.web.mvc.action result class, and it returns a view. So view actually looks for a home directory inside views, right? And it will search for about.cshtml file. So about.cshtml file is actually rendered. So what's happening in about.cshtml file? It's using a ViewBag, and ViewBag.title is accessed, and .message is accessed, and displaying some information. Use this area to provide additional information. So this is actually our CSHTML file. So the data is sent from here using a ViewBag. So ViewBag is actually a controller based class. You can set different properties of ViewBag over here, and then you can send that. Let's say, for example, if I add ViewBag dot my message, I am sending something from about action, right? So I can access this using ViewBag over here. So let's add a paragraph, and I will use, so @sign is actually a razor syntax which is used in ASP.NET MVC, and we will talk about razor syntax a bit more. It's quite flexible syntax. You can mix your HTML and your razor syntax all together, so it's quite flexible. Maybe we will talk about this over here. So my message. So what I am doing over here is I'm using my MSG over here. This is a viewbag.msg, and I'm accessing, basically I'm sending this small amount of data from this controller to the view. So its usage or access limit would be until this page, and until one request. So when I request this home controller about action, it creates a view bag and it returns a view, and this view can access that view bag. So like it's already accessing a message, and now it will access my message, that my MSG. So let's run this, and it's already accessing home/about. So when you have opened a view and you run this application, so it will by default launch that specific controller and view. So you can see that I am sending something from about action. So this text is displayed because inside the controller we did set this. And again, if this application is running right now, and you don't need to stop this application if we are doing any changes over here. So for example, if I say that this is something coming from controller. So if we save this, and if I refresh this, this is something coming from controller, right? So let's make it a bit strong, getting stronger. So oops, weren't strong. So refresh. So this is coming from controller. So now you see that how this flow actually works. So whenever you send a request through a URL which is specified in a URL routing, that Whenever you send a request, your routing pattern is it will look for a controller, it will look for an action, and it will look for an ID, and ID is actually optional, and by default it's home and index. So let's change the default home and about. So if I run this, so if you don't specify anything in the URL, it should go to the home controller and trigger the about action. So about action is actually setting a ViewBag and returning a view. So what about if we have added another action? So I am adding an action, result is the type, and I am adding another action. Let's say for example demo, and return view. So what will happen if somebody access this demo? So let's see. So let's by default add this or launch this demo action. So we don't need to type on the URL. So when we type this home and demo, which is equivalent to home/demo, so it will actually look for views directory at the root, and look for home directory, and look for demo.aspx, ascx, cshtml, vbhtml file inside home, inside shared, and it actually did not find anything because from demo we are returning a view. So which means that we need to it will look for the demo.cshtml file. But what about if we want to display some other HTML file? So I stop this and I will do the changes. So in the view we have multiple options that what we want to do over here. So let's, for example, by default it will look for demo.cshtml, and you can return iView, and you can return a model. We have not discussed models right now. We can discuss a different view name. Let's say for example I am returning about. So demo will also return about.cshtml. Right, so it's returning about action. Alright, and then you will realize that this about, which is actually displaying some messages, is different than this about, because in this about, which is actually home controller, that request comes to the controller creates a ViewBag, and view uses that view. So this is also one clue that this ViewBag will be used only for the first time when user access the home controller and about action and returns the view. But in this case we did not set anything, but let's set some message like we need to stop because we are modifying controller. So dot message is, let's say for example, so I will change this to this from demo action. So now this from demo action should be displayed on this about.cshtml file, because in about.cshtml file that is used from demo action, right? So this is coming from ViewBag, right? So this is actually that's how it works, and in next video we will create our own controller, and then we will be sending some more data from the view. Right now we are not sending anything from the view to the controller. We are just directly hitting a URL, and in the URL we specify a controller name, we specify an action name, and in action it returns the view, and view is just displaying the information, right? Alright, so see you in next video. Bye bye for now.